Every morning begins the same way. I open my eyes at 5:30 a.m., even without an alarm clock. 50 years of work have taught me to get up at dawn, and now 2 years after retirement, nothing has changed, except that there is no longer any reason to get up. The house greets me with silence. 5 years have passed, and I still turn my head toward the empty half of the bed where Edith used to sleep. Sometimes I think I hear her clattering dishes in the kitchen, but it's just the neighbor's cat, which has taken to climbing on the windowsill. My name is Rodney Baxter. I'm 67 years old, and I live alone in Titusville, a town where everyone knows each other, but few people care about a lonely retiree. I worked as a water supply specialist for 35 years. I crawled through basements, replaced pipes, and fixed leaks. It wasn't the most prestigious job, but it was honest. I was proud of what I did. I always did my job conscientiously, and my customers appreciated that. The last year before retirement was the hardest. My knees aren't what they used to be, my back hurts, but I worked until the end. I haven't taken a single sick day in the last 10 years, and I'm especially proud of that. And then one day it all ended. They handed me a certificate, my colleagues shook my hand, and I was left alone with empty days. Today is Friday, which means my son Mortimer and his wife Beryl should be arriving. They come every 2 weeks, always on Fridays, always at 6 in the evening. Like clockwork, like a duty. I look at the clock. It's only 10 in the morning. To kill time, I decide to do some cooking. Mortimer loves my chicken casserole, although he would never admit it. I know that he and Beryl usually eat some kind of trendy, healthy food, but when they come to my place, they gobble down homemade food. As I rummage through the fridge, I remember Mortimer when he was little, a lively, energetic boy who loved listening to my stories. When Edith and I took him fishing, he would ask 1,000 questions. Now he checks his watch every 10 minutes when he comes to visit. Mortimer is 39 and works as an insurance specialist for a large company. He always wears a pressed shirt and carries a tablet under his arm. I'm proud of him. He got an education and found a good job. But sometimes I can't shake the feeling that he's ashamed of me. His father with calloused hands and simple manners. His wife Beryl is a graphic designer. She's as thin as a reed, always wearing fancy earrings and strange outfits. She is polite to me, but I can feel her cringe when I try to tell her a story from my life. For her, it's probably boring and primitive. By 4 o'clock, the casserole is ready. I set the table and take out the good plates that are usually kept in the cupboard. Edith and I bought them for our 20th wedding anniversary. She loved beautiful tableware. At 5:45, I start to get nervous. I walk through the rooms checking that everything is in order. Although what is there to check? The house is clean. I clean every day. More for myself than for the guests. Cleanliness helps me keep my mind in order. At 6 o'clock sharp, I hear the sound of a car pulling up. Mortimer drives a black Volkswagen, which he replaces every 3 years. He now has the latest model, although the old one, in my opinion, was just as good. "Hi, Dad." Mortimer hugs me with one arm, not letting go of his phone with the other. "How are you doing?" "Same as always," I reply, trying not to show how happy I am to see them. "Come in, I made a casserole." Beryl kisses me on the cheek. She smells of some fashionable perfume and coffee. "Hello, Rodney. What a wonderful garden you have. These petunias are simply magnificent." I nod. I take special care of my garden. Edith always dreamed of beautiful flowers, but she didn't have enough time for them. Now I have plenty of time. We sit down at the table and I pour the tea. Mortimer immediately helps himself to a large portion of casserole, but before he starts eating, he takes a photo of his plate with his phone. "For Instagram," he explains, noticing my gaze. "Friday dinner at Dad's." Followers love family moments like this. I nod, although I don't quite understand why we should show our food to strangers. But young people have their quirks. "How's work?" I ask Mortimer. "Everything's great, Dad." Last week we signed a contract with a big company. The boss is very happy. He says I can expect a raise by the end of the year. "That's great," I say, genuinely happy for him. "How are things with you, Beryl?" "Oh, I have so many projects right now," she says, perking up. "I'm designing a logo for a new organic coffee shop and redesigning a website for a construction company. The clients are very demanding, but that makes the work interesting." I listen to their stories about work, nodding in the right places and asking questions. They talk mostly to each other, sometimes including me in the conversation. It's as if they're fulfilling a duty, not to forget about the old man. After dinner, Mortimer turns on the TV and looks for a football game. Beryl sits next to him, buried in her phone. I clear the table, declining their formal offers to help. Dad, we're thinking about renovating the living room, Mortimer says during the commercials. Beryl wants a Scandinavian style, minimalism and all that. Yes, your house could really use some updating. I nod, remembering how 2 years ago I gave them all my savings, $90,000 for the down payment on this house. Mortimer had dreamed of owning his own home ever since he married Beryl. I couldn't say no to my son. Edith always said we should help him. Who are we saving for if not him, she often repeated. And when they found their dream house but didn't have enough for the down payment, I didn't hesitate to give them the money Edith and I had been saving for our retirement. You know, Dad, Mortimer interrupts my thoughts, you could renovate your house too. This wallpaper is completely out of style. I'm fine with it, I shrug. Why spend money? I don't need much on my own. Beryl looks up from her phone. Rodney, your surroundings affect your mood. A new interior could lift your spirits, I don't argue. There's no point in explaining to them that after Edith's death, I don't want to change anything in the house. Everything here is connected to her, to our life together. The wallpaper may be old, but she chose it. By 9 o'clock, Mortimer starts glancing at his watch. I know they'll be leaving soon. Their visits never last longer than 3 hours. Dad, we have to go, he finally says. We have to get up early tomorrow. Beryl has a meeting with a client. I walk them to the door. Mortimer hugs me. Beryl kisses me on the cheek again. We'll come back in 2 weeks, okay? My son says from the car. If you need anything, call me. I nod and wave until their car disappears around the corner. Then I return to the house, which is once again plunged into silence. I put the leftover casserole in the refrigerator. It will last for a few days. I wash the dishes and wipe the table. The usual evening rituals. Before going to bed, I sit down in an armchair and take out an old photo album. Here is Mortimer as a little boy, in Edith's arms. Here we are on a picnic by the lake. Here is his first day of school. It's strange how quickly time flies. It seems like only yesterday I was teaching him to ride a bike, and today he looks at me as if I were a burden. Maybe I'm being unfair to him. He has his own life, his own family. I can't demand that he devote more time to me. But still, Edith would be upset to see how distant we've become. The next morning I wake up with an unexpected idea. It spins around in my head for a few days until it takes shape as a clear plan. A family trip. We haven't gone anywhere together in a long time. The last time was when Mortimer was 16, and Edith and I took him to the Great Lakes. I decide not to put it off and call my son. Mortimer, I say when he finally picks up after the 5th ring, I have a suggestion. Dad, I'm a little busy right now, he says impatiently. Can you call me back tonight? It won't take long, I insist. I thought we could go on vacation together. The 3 of us. To Arizona, for example, I've wanted to see the Grand Canyon for a long time. There is a pause on the other end of the line. Dad, I don't know. Beryl and I have a lot of work, and we were planning to take a vacation in the fall. I'll pay for everything, I quickly add. It will be my gift to you, and to myself, too. Another pause. I can almost see Mortimer trying to figure out how to politely decline. Let me discuss it with Beryl and call you back, okay? He finally says. Sure, I agree, feeling my hopes melt away. To my surprise, Mortimer calls back himself that evening. Dad, Beryl and I have thought about it, and we think it's a good idea. When would you like to go? I can't hide my joy. How about early June? The weather will be nice, not too hot. Sounds good. I'll take a week off, and Beryl can put her projects on hold too. We discuss the details, and I feel warmth spreading inside me. Maybe this trip will help us grow closer again. Maybe away from the daily routine, Mortimer will remember that I'm not just an old man he has to visit on a schedule, but his father. After our conversation, I sit on the porch for a long time, looking at my garden. The petunias that Beryl likes so much sway in the light breeze. Edith would have approved of this idea. She always believed that families should stick together. In the coming days, I immerse myself in planning the trip. I study routes, hotels, and attractions. I order tickets and book rooms. I spend almost all of my remaining savings, but I don't regret it. Nothing is too much for my family. I imagine how we will admire the sunset over the Grand Canyon together, how we will discuss what we have seen over dinner, how we will take pictures against the backdrop of red rocks. Maybe in this setting, Mortimer and Beryl will see me not as a burden, but as someone interesting to spend time with. There is a month left before departure, and I am counting the days. This will be our first family trip in many years, and perhaps the last chance to mend my relationship with my son. The day of departure came unexpectedly quickly. 2 weeks before the trip, I started packing my suitcase, sorting through things that might come in handy in Arizona. A new shirt bought especially for the occasion, comfortable shoes for long walks, a wide-brimmed hat for sun protection. Edith always said I was too pale and needed to protect myself from sunburn. The night before, I hardly slept, feeling as nervous as a child before a school trip. At 5 in the morning, I was already up, checking for the third time that everything was packed and nothing had been forgotten. Mortimer was supposed to pick me up at 7 to make it to the plane at 10:30. At exactly 7, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Mortimer is never late. That's one of his best qualities. I value punctuality in people. "Good morning, Dad." Mortimer looked cheerful, although I knew he wasn't the type to get up easily in the morning. "Ready for adventure?" "You bet." I couldn't help but smile. "Good morning, Beryl." My sister-in-law nodded at me from the car without looking up from her phone. She was wearing large sunglasses, even though the sun had barely risen above the horizon. "We have to hurry," Mortimer said, taking my suitcase. "The highway is already congested at this time of day." I sat in the back seat. Beryl insisted that she needed to be in the front, otherwise she would get car sick. The car started moving, and I looked back at my house one last time. For some reason, my heart ached, even though I knew I would be back in a week. "I booked us good seats by the window," I said, trying to start a conversation. "They say the views on the approach to Arizona are amazing." "That's wonderful, Rodney," Beryl replied without turning around. "Except I prefer to sit by the aisle. Claustrophobia, you know." "Oh, of course." I felt a little silly. "Then I'll switch with you." "I prefer to sleep on the plane," Mortimer said. "Work is exhausting. Every minute of rest counts." I nodded, though no one saw it, and we rode the rest of the way in silence. Only the radio played quietly some modern music that I didn't recognize. The airport was crowded. I walked slower than Mortimer and Beryl, who moved swiftly through the crowd with such ease as if they did this every day. Perhaps that was the case. They often flew for work. The last time I had been at an airport was 10 years ago, when Edith and I flew to visit her sister in Florida. "Dad, are you coming?" Mortimer called out, turning around. There was a slight irritation in his voice. "Check-in is about to close." "Coming, coming." I quickened my pace as much as I could, feeling my knee begin to ache. An old injury, sustained while working at the water company, flared up whenever I tried to move faster than usual. After checking in and dropping off our luggage, we proceeded to the waiting area. Beryl immediately headed for the cafe. "I need some decent coffee," she explained. "They only serve swill on the plane." Mortimer and I sat by the window looking at the runway. I saw my son tapping his fingers impatiently on the armrest. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yes, I just need to answer a couple of work emails," he said, taking out his phone and immersing himself in it. I watched the planes taking off one after another, strange metal birds carrying people to different corners of the world. I wonder where all these people are going. Who are they rushing to see? Our flight was announced and we got in line. Beryl returned with a large cup of coffee and a dissatisfied expression on her face. "Can you believe they don't serve vegan breakfast options?" she complained. "I had to settle for coffee with almond milk." On the plane, I gave Beryl my window seat and sat in the middle. Mortimer took the aisle seat and immediately put on his headphones, making it clear that he wasn't in the mood to talk. Beryl settled in the window seat, took out a book. Something about minimalism and mindfulness. I sat between them, feeling out of place. But that's okay, I thought. It's just the beginning of the trip. We had a whole week ahead of us and plenty of time to get to know each other. The flight went smoothly. I watched a movie on the small screen in front of me, but I kept getting distracted by thoughts of the trip ahead. What places would we visit? What would we talk about in the evenings? Would we become closer? At the Phoenix airport, we were met by heat that hit us as soon as we stepped out of the air-conditioned terminal building. "God, this is unbearable," Beryl moaned, putting on her sunglasses. "I hope the car has air conditioning." "Of course it does," Mortimer assured her. "I rented a nice car." I followed them silently to the parking lot, where a silver SUV awaited us. Mortimer pointed to it proudly. "Comfort and off-road capability," he said. "Perfect for our canyon trips." I climbed into the back seat, habitually giving up the front seat to Beryl. Mortimer turned on the navigation system, and we drove onto the highway leading to the Grand Canyon. "Our first stop is Sedona," Mortimer announced. "There are beautiful red rocks and a great hotel with a swimming pool. Dad, you'll love it." "I'm sure I will," I nodded, looking out the window at the passing scenery. Arizona was exactly as I had imagined it. Endless expanses, red-orange earth, cacti resembling sentinels guarding the desert. The beauty was breathtaking. We drove for about 3 hours before we reached Sedona. Mortimer and Beryl occasionally talked about something between themselves, but mostly they were silent. I was silent too, admiring the views and thinking about how I would show the photos to my neighbors when I got home. The hotel in Sedona looked impressive. A 2-story ranch-style building surrounded by red rocks. Inside it was cool and smelled of some kind of herbs. "Welcome to the Red Gate," smiled the girl at the reception desk. "Do you have a reservation under the name Baxter?" "Yes, for 3, I confirmed. "Perfect. We have 2 rooms next to each other. A family suite with a double bed. In a standard room with a single bed," I turned to Mortimer and Beryl. "I got you the suite and a regular room for myself. I thought you'd need more space." "Thanks, Dad." Mortimer looked pleased. "That's very thoughtful." We went up to our rooms and I was left alone in mine. It was small but cozy, with a window overlooking the cliffs. I unpacked my things and sat down on the bed, feeling a little tired after the flight and the drive. Half an hour later, there was a knock at the door. Mortimer was standing on the threshold wearing shorts and a t-shirt. "Beryl and I are going to walk around town and have dinner somewhere. Are you coming with us?" "Sure." I quickly changed and went out to meet them. Sedona turned out to be a charming little town full of art galleries, cafes, and souvenir shops. We walked down the main street, and I couldn't take my eyes off the majestic red rocks surrounding the town. "Amazing, isn't it?" I said, pointing to one of the cliffs that resembled a bell tower. "Yes, impressive," Mortimer agreed, but then immediately became distracted by his phone. "Oh, Beryl, look, there's a restaurant with a vegetarian menu." "How about there?" Beryl beamed. "Great. I'm starving." The restaurant turned out to be a trendy place, with minimalist decor and a menu full of dishes I didn't recognize. I took a long time to decide what to order, and ended up with a simple salad and a turkey sandwich. "Dad, you have to try the quinoa," Beryl advised. "It's a superfood, very good for your health." "Next time," I replied politely, even though I didn't even know what quinoa was. Over dinner, Mortimer and Beryl discussed their vacation plans, occasionally asking for my opinion, but mostly deciding everything between themselves. I didn't mind. It was enough for me just to be with them, to see how excited they were talking about their upcoming excursions. "Tomorrow we're going to the Grand Canyon," Mortimer announced. "We'll have to get up early to avoid the crowds of tourists." "What time?" I asked. 6, he replied. "We'll be there by 8, just in time for the observation decks to open." I nodded, trying not to show that I was daunted by the prospect of getting up early after a long day. But for the Grand Canyon, it was worth it. After dinner, we returned to the hotel. I felt the fatigue that had built up during the day and wanted only one thing: to go to bed and sleep. "Good night," I said, approaching the door to my room. "See you tomorrow." "Good night, Dad," Mortimer replied. "Don't forget to set your alarm." I nodded and entered the room. The last thing I heard before closing the door was Beryl whispering, "I hope he doesn't slow us down tomorrow." Those words stuck in my head, and I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, thinking that I had become a burden on their vacation. In the morning, I woke up before the alarm at 5:30 and started getting ready, trying to move as quickly as possible. I didn't want to be the reason for the delay. My knee hurt after yesterday's walk, but I took a painkiller and decided I could handle it. After all, I hadn't worked physically my whole life for nothing. I have endurance. At exactly 6 o'clock, Mortimer knocked on the door. "Are you ready, Dad?" he asked. "Beryl is already in the car." "Yes, let's go." I took my backpack and followed him. Beryl was sitting in the car, leafing through a guidebook. She barely glanced at me when I got into the back seat. "Good morning, Ann," I said. "Good morning," she replied curtly, without looking up from her book. The drive to the Grand Canyon took about 2 hours. We drove in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I looked out the window at the desert waking up, enjoying the peace and quiet. When we arrived at the Grand Canyon, I was struck by its grandeur. The endless expanse, the layers of red and orange rock stretching into the distance. It was even more impressive than I had imagined. Mortimer and Beryl immediately started taking pictures with the canyon in the background, while I stood aside, afraid to disturb them. "Dad, come here, I'll take your picture," Mortimer called. I walked over and stood at the edge of the observation deck. Mortimer took a few pictures and then returned to Beryl, who was already planning a route along the trails. "There's the Bright Angel Trail," she said, showing me the map. "The views are amazing." "How difficult is it?" I asked, moving closer. Beryl looked at me with slight irritation. "Moderately difficult, but there are some steep descents." "Are you sure you can handle it, Rodney?" I felt a twinge of hurt. "I think so. I'm no marathon runner, but I can still walk." Mortimer exchanged glances with Beryl, and I noticed their unspoken doubts. "You know what?" I said. "You guys go on this trail, and I'll stay here, sit down, and enjoy the view. We'll meet up later." "Are you sure, Dad?" Mortimer's voice sounded relieved. "We can choose an easier route." "No, no, go ahead," I waved my hand. "I really just want to sit and take it all in." They didn't argue and left, quickly disappearing into the crowd of tourists. I found a free bench and sat down, looking at the canyon. An elderly couple sat down next to me, and we started talking. They turned out to be Germans who had come to America for the national parks. We exchanged impressions, and I enjoyed this chance conversation. When Mortimer and Beryl returned 3 hours later, excited and satisfied with their walk, I was still sitting on the same bench. "How was the walk?" I asked. "Amazing." Beryl showed me her photos. "The views are incredible, Rodney. It's a shame you didn't come with us." "Next time," I smiled, although I knew there might not be a next time. On the 5th day of our trip, we moved from Sedona to Flagstaff, a town nestled in a pine forest that contrasted sharply with the desert landscapes that had surrounded us before. It was cooler here, the air smelled of pine needles, and I felt a little better. The hotel Mortimer had booked turned out to be an old building in the center of town, with wooden floors and antique furniture. My room was at the end of the corridor, next to the fire escape, while Mortimer and Beryl got a room overlooking the main street. "How do you like the room, Dad?" Mortimer asked when we met in the lobby after checking in. "Great," I lied. In fact, the room smelled musty, and the mattress was so worn that I doubted I would be able to sleep properly. But I didn't want to complain. I felt like I had already ruined their vacation enough with my slowness and whining. "Great," Mortimer nodded. "Beryl and I want to go shopping." "Are you coming with us or staying in to rest?" I could see in his eyes what answer he was expecting. "I think I'll stay in. I'll read a book, take a nap. You go ahead and enjoy yourselves." The relief on his face was almost palpable. "See you at dinner then." 7 o'clock at the hotel restaurant? "Sure." I waved goodbye and headed for my room. I spent the rest of the day lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't read the book I had brought with me. My thoughts kept returning to how my relationship with Mortimer had changed in recent years. When did it start? When did he begin to see me not as a father, but as a burden? Maybe after Edith's death? She had always been the link between us. She knew how to smooth things over and find common topics of conversation. Without her, we seemed to have forgotten how to communicate. Or was it Beryl? I remember when I first met her, a young woman with cold eyes and a polite smile. She was always impeccably polite to me, but that politeness was like a glass wall, transparent but impenetrable. At 7 o'clock, I went down to the restaurant. Mortimer and Beryl were already sitting at a table by the window, studying the menu. They looked relaxed and happy, as if they had had a wonderful day without me. "There you are, Dad," Mortimer waved at me. "Did you have a good rest?" "Yes, thanks." I sat down across from them. "How was your shopping trip?" "Wonderful," Beryl perked up. "I found some stunning silver earrings with turquoise. Real local craftsmanship. She showed me the earrings, massive, with large turquoise stones. Not my taste, but I nodded politely. Very beautiful. And we also bought a bottle of local wine," Mortimer added. "Would you like to try some, Dad?" "No, thank you." I shook my head. "My doctor doesn't recommend alcohol because of my blood pressure." "Oh, yes, I completely forgot." Mortimer shrugged and returned to studying the menu. We ordered dinner. Beryl chose some kind of complex salad, Mortimer had a steak, and I decided to stick to soup and bread. I had almost no appetite. The conversation didn't flow during dinner. Mortimer and Beryl discussed their plans for tomorrow, while I silently ate my soup, nodding in the right places. They decided to go to Petrified Forest National Park, famous for its petrified trees. "You have to walk a lot there, Dad," Mortimer said, glancing at me. "Are you sure you can handle it?" "I think so," I replied, even though I already knew they would prefer me to stay at the hotel. "We just don't want you to overexert yourself," Beryl added with feigned concern in her voice. "It's hot and the walks are long." "I'm not made of glass," I said, feeling irritation rising inside me. 35 years of physical labor and not a single sick day in the last 10 years. "I think I can handle a walk in the park." Beryl looked surprised at my sharpness, and Mortimer frowned. "No one's saying you can't do it, Dad. We're just worried about you." I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "I'm sorry. I just don't want to be a burden to you." "You're not a burden," Mortimer said quickly, but his eyes said otherwise. After dinner, they decided to sit in the hotel bar. I declined, citing fatigue, and went up to my room. I didn't feel like sleeping, so I decided to go downstairs and get some fresh air. Flagstaff at night was quiet and almost deserted. I walked down the main street, looking at the windows of closed shops, and returned to the hotel. Passing by the bar, I saw Mortimer and Beryl through the window. They were sitting at a table in the corner, their heads bowed toward each other, discussing something heatedly. I wasn't going to eavesdrop, honestly, but something in their posture, in their expressions, made me slow down. I stopped at the open window of the bar, pretending to look at the sign of the neighboring store. "I just can't take it anymore," Beryl said. "He slows us down at every turn. I understand he's your father, but this trip is turning into a nightmare." "Do you think it's easy for me?" Mortimer's voice was tinged with irritation. I didn't expect him to be so helpless either. "Helpless? He's just a selfish old man who's ruining our vacation." Beryl took a sip from her glass. "We could be in Italy right now, like I wanted. But no, your father decided we should drag ourselves to this godforsaken place to look at rocks and cacti." "He paid for the trip," Mortimer reminded her. "Oh, of course. After years of putting up with his whining and complaining, it's the least he could do. Besides, what else can he do with his money? He has no one but us." I froze in place, unable to believe my ears. Do they really think that about me? "Listen," Beryl continued after a pause. "I have an idea. Let's get rid of him." "What?" Mortimer looked shocked. "Not in that sense, silly," Beryl laughed. "I mean, let's leave him in the next town and continue the trip together. Let's say you have urgent business at work and we have to go back early. We'll leave him money for a return ticket, and that's it." "I can't just abandon my father in the middle of a trip," Mortimer objected, but without much conviction in his voice. "Why not?" Beryl insisted. "He's a grown man. He'll be fine. And we'll finally be able to relax properly without having to constantly look back at that old man." Mortimer was silent, and I could see the struggle between his sense of duty and his desire to agree with his wife on his face. "Think about it." Beryl put her hand on his. "We deserve a normal vacation. Without him, I didn't listen any further." I quietly walked away from the window and headed for the hotel entrance. My chest felt heavy, as if someone had put a stone in it. So that's how they feel about me? A burden, a selfish old man, someone who needs to be gotten rid of. In my room, I sat down on the bed, trying to process what I had heard. I had worked for Mortimer my whole life, saving money for his education, helping with the down payment on his house, and now he was discussing with his wife how to get rid of me. I remembered little Mortimer running to meet me when I came home from work, how proud he was of me when I fixed things around the house. When did that change? When did I stop being a hero in his eyes and become a burden? Bitterness turned to anger. I sat in the dark, listening to music playing somewhere in the distance, thinking about how my own son was ashamed of me. Several hours must have passed before I heard footsteps in the hallway and the voices of Mortimer and Beryl. They stopped at their door, and I heard Beryl laugh. "We'll tell him tomorrow," Mortimer said. "After breakfast. Fine, Beryl replied. I can't wait to get rid of that old man. The door slammed shut, and the hallway was quiet again. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and going over my options in my mind. I could make a scene and tell them exactly what I thought. I could swallow my pride and go home as they had planned. I could... Suddenly, it dawned on me. Why should I wait for them to get rid of me? Why not beat them to it? I got out of bed and turned on the light. I took a notebook and pen out of my suitcase and began to write. Mortimer and Beryl, I received a call from Titusville. There are urgent family circumstances that require my immediate return. I didn't want to wake you, so I left on my own. Continue your vacation without me. Rodney, I reread the note. It sounded convincing enough. Family circumstances, vague and serious at the same time. Mortimer and Beryl would be only too happy to get rid of me, so they were unlikely to call and ask for details. I quickly gathered my things and went down to the reception desk. The night porter, a young guy with sleepy eyes, looked at me in surprise. How can I help you, sir? I need to leave urgently, I said. Family circumstances. Could you call a taxi to Phoenix Airport? Of course, sir, he said, reaching for the phone. But it's quite a distance, so the taxi will cost... Money is no problem, I interrupted him. And please give this note to my son and his wife tomorrow morning. They are in room 212. I handed him the note and a $20 bill. He nodded, putting the money in his pocket. Will do, sir. The taxi would arrive in 15 minutes. I went outside and sat down on a bench in front of the hotel. The night air was cool and I put on my jacket. Fragments of Mortimer and Beryl's conversation were spinning around in my head. Selfish old man. Let's get rid of him. We need a normal vacation. Without him, the taxi arrived exactly 15 minutes later. I sat in the back seat and gave the airport address. Night flight? Asked the driver, an elderly man with a gray mustache. Yes, I lied. In fact, I had no idea when the next flight home was. But it didn't matter. The main thing was to get out of here as soon as possible. The drive to Phoenix took about 2 hours. I looked out the window at the moonlit desert and thought about what to do next. A plan began to form in my head. Vague at first, then becoming clearer. They want to get rid of me? Well, I can get rid of something too. For example, the house I bought for them, and all the other property they consider theirs. At the Phoenix airport, I bought a ticket for the next flight home with a layover in Dallas. There were 3 hours left before departure, and I settled into the waiting room, continuing to think over my plan. I remembered how 2 years ago I had given Mortimer and Beryl all my savings for the down payment on their house. $90,000. The amount Edith and I had saved our entire lives. I didn't regret it then. The joy in my son's eyes was worth any amount of money. But now I realized that for them it was a matter of course. They believed that I should help them, that it was my duty. And at the same time, they considered me a burden. When they announced boarding for my flight, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. Revenge is a dish best served cold. And that's exactly how I was going to serve it. Cold, calculated, and ruthless. The flight passed in a blur. I hardly slept, replaying the details of my plan in my head. I had a 2-hour layover in Dallas, and I used that time to call my old friend Noel, who worked at a law firm. Rodney, he said, surprised to hear my voice. Aren't you on vacation? I came back early, I replied curtly. Noel, I need your help. Legal help. What happened? I'll explain when we meet. Can you see me tomorrow? Of course. Noel's voice sounded worried. Come to the office at 10. Is everything okay? It'll be okay, I replied. Thanks, Noel. When I finally arrived in Titusville, it was late in the evening. I took a taxi home, feeling a strange sense of relief at being back in familiar surroundings. The house greeted me with silence and the smell of an uninhabited space. I turned on the light, threw my suitcase in the hallway, and went into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the table, looking out the window at my garden, glistening in the moonlight. Somewhere at that moment, Mortimer and Beryl probably received my note. I wonder what they thought. Were they glad that I had saved them the trouble of getting rid of me? Or were they surprised by my sudden independence? I smiled as I imagined their reaction, but that was only the beginning. The real surprise was yet to come. In the morning, I drove to Noel's office. It was located in the center of Titusville, in an old building with columns. A young woman I didn't know, his secretary, showed me into his office. Noel rose from behind his desk to shake my hand. He hadn't changed much in the years since we'd last seen each other. Still thin, with a neat beard and attentive eyes behind his glasses. "Rodney, it's good to see you," he said, pointing to a chair across from his desk. "What's wrong?" "You look upset." I sat down and took a deep breath. "I want to sell my son's house." Noel raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Your son's house? You mean the house Mortimer lives in?" "Yes," I nodded. 2 years ago, I gave him money for the down payment, $90,000. I insisted that my name be on the documents too, just in case. Now I want to sell that house, Rodney. Noel leaned forward. "What happened between you two?" I told him everything. About the trip, how Mortimer and Beryl treated me, the conversation I overheard. Noel listened silently without interrupting, only nodding occasionally. "I understand how you feel," he said when I finished. "But selling the house where your son lives, that's a serious step." "I know," I replied, "but they have to understand that their actions have consequences. They wanted to get rid of me? Well, now they'll have to live with the results of their choice." Noel sighed and leaned back in his chair. "All right, let's look at the documents. If your name is indeed listed as a co-owner, technically you have the right to sell your share. But it will be a complicated process." "I have time," I said, "and I'm willing to pay for your services." Noel nodded and took a notepad out of his desk drawer. "Then let's get started. Tell me all the details about the purchase of the house, what documents were signed, whose name is on the mortgage." We spent several hours in his office sorting out the legal details. To my surprise and delight, it turned out that my position was stronger than I thought. Since my contribution was a significant part of the cost of the house, and my name was listed on the documents as a co-borrower, I had every right to initiate the sale. "But it will take time," Noel warned me, "and Mortimer will surely resist." "Let him," I shrugged. "I'm ready for that." Leaving Noel's office, I felt a surge of energy. For the first time in a long time, I had a goal, a plan of action. I was no longer a helpless old man they wanted to get rid of. I was a man who was going to teach his ungrateful children a lesson. When I got home, I sat down at my computer and started looking for information about real estate agencies in our city. I found a few with good reviews and sent them inquiries. Then I called the airline and asked when Mortimer and Beryl were due back from Arizona. It turned out to be in 3 days. I didn't have much time, but I was determined to act quickly. The next day, I met with a realtor, a young woman named Helen. She listened carefully to my story and promised to do everything possible to speed up the sale. "It usually takes several weeks or even months," she said. "But in your case, given the circumstances, we can try to find a buyer faster." "Do everything you can," I asked. "The price is not as important as the speed." Helen nodded and made a note in her notebook. "I'll start working on it right away. And one more thing, Mr. Baxter. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Selling your house is a serious step that could permanently damage your relationship with your son." I smiled bitterly. "That relationship is already damaged, Miss Helen. Now I just want them to understand what it means to be abandoned by someone you trusted." She asked no more questions and set to work. I returned home and began preparing for the next stage of my plan. I spent the next 3 days in a feverish flurry of activity. Noel helped me sort out all the legal details related to Mortimer and Beryl's house. It turned out that my position was even stronger than I had initially assumed. When Mortimer and Beryl bought the house, I insisted that my name be on the documents too, just in case. At the time, it seemed like a formality that might come in handy if something happened to them. Now it gave me the legal right to dispose of the property. "You're actually a co-owner, Rodney," Noel explained as he looked through the documents. "Since your contribution was a significant part of the down payment and your name is listed on the purchase agreement, you have every right to initiate the sale." "What about Mortimer's consent?" I asked. "Isn't that required?" Noel adjusted his glasses and looked at me over the papers. "In an ideal world, yes. But there are legal mechanisms that allow you to get around that, especially if the other party is unavailable. Considering that they are currently away and not answering their phones, we can begin the sale process. In addition," he paused, "there is another interesting point." "What is it?" I leaned forward. "There is a clause in the contract stating that if one party fails to meet their mortgage obligations for 3 months, the other party has the right to initiate a sale to repay the debt." So what? Mortimer pays his mortgage regularly. Yes, but technically, part of those payments should have gone toward repaying your initial down payment. That was stipulated in the additional agreement you signed. And Mortimer hasn't made a single such payment. I was stunned. Indeed, when I gave him the money for the house, Mortimer and I drew up a simple written agreement that it was not a gift, but a loan that he would gradually repay. But then I never brought up the subject, believing that helping my son was natural and not expecting the money back. I forgot about that agreement, I admitted. But the bank didn't forget. Noel tapped his finger on the paper. It was registered along with the main contract, and according to it, Mortimer was supposed to pay you a certain amount every month, which he didn't do. That gives us an additional argument. I left Noel's office feeling that fate was on my side. What had seemed like a minor formality 2 years ago had now become a powerful tool for carrying out my plan. Helen, the real estate agent I hired, turned out to be a true professional. She quickly arranged for the house to be appraised and began showing it to potential buyers while Mortimer and Beryl were away. The market is booming right now, she told me on the phone, and the neighborhood where the house is located is very popular. I think we can sell it quickly and at a good price. Price isn't as important as speed, I reminded her. I want everything to be completed before they return. That's an ambitious goal, Mr. Baxter, Helen said doubtfully. The process usually takes several weeks or even months. You have 3 days, I said firmly. I'm willing to lower the price 10% below market value if it helps speed up the sale. After a short pause, Helen replied, Okay, I'll do my best. I have a couple of clients who are looking for a house in this area and are ready to act quickly. I'll contact them immediately. While Helen was looking for a buyer for the house, I decided to take care of the rest of Mortimer and Beryl's belongings. I had the keys to their house. They had left me a spare set in case of emergencies. When I entered their house, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. On the one hand, bitterness and resentment for how they had treated me. On the other, a slight feeling of guilt for what I was about to do. But then I remembered Beryl's words. We need to get rid of that old man, and my determination returned. I went through all the rooms, making a list of things that could be sold quickly. Expensive furniture they had bought after moving in. The latest models of appliances. Mortimer's vinyl record collection, which he was so proud of. Beryl's designer clothes. After photographing everything, I posted ads on several websites for selling used items, listing very attractive prices and marking them as urgent. Responses began to come in almost immediately. People were interested in the leather sofa, the plasma TV, the vintage record player. I arranged meetings with them at Mortimer and Beryl's house, one after the other, at half-hour intervals. The first to arrive was a young man interested in the vinyl collection. He was delighted with the condition of the records and couldn't believe his luck when I named the price. Half the market value. Are you sure? He asked, counting the money. Some of these records are real rarities. Absolutely, I replied. I need to get rid of them urgently. He left, carrying boxes of records, and I felt a pang of regret. Mortimer had been collecting this collection for many years, starting when he was a teenager. But then I remembered his words about me being helpless, and the regret subsided. Next came a couple interested in a sofa and a TV. They were surprised to see how good the furniture was. Why are you selling so cheap? The woman asked, cautiously sitting down on the edge of the sofa. We're moving to another city, I lied. We need to sell everything quickly. They didn't ask any more questions and happily paid the asking price. We agreed that they would send movers to pick up the furniture in the evening. The day flew by in a flurry of activity. People came and went, taking Mortimer and Beryl's belongings with them. By evening, the house was noticeably emptier. Only large pieces of furniture remained, which the buyers were to pick up the next day, in personal items, which I did not touch. When I got home, I counted the money I had earned. It came to about $15,000 in cash. Not bad for one day's work, although, of course, much less than the real value of the items sold. In the evening, Helen called with good news. Mr. Baxter, I have a potential buyer. The Thompson family just sold their house and are looking for a new one. They really like the photos and are ready to come see it tomorrow morning. Great, I said. What time will they be here? At 10. And there's more good news. They can pay cash, no mortgage. That will speed things up considerably. That's wonderful, I said, feeling a surge of satisfaction wash over me. I'll be there. The next day, I met the Thompsons at Mortimer and Barrel's house. They were a pleasant, middle-aged couple with two teenage children. They carefully inspected the house, asking questions about utilities, neighbors, and nearby schools. I answered as best I could, trying to be honest but emphasizing the advantages of the house and the neighborhood. I had conflicting feelings inside. On the one hand, I wanted to sell the house as quickly as possible. On the other hand, I felt a strange responsibility to these people who were about to invest their savings in the purchase. "The house is in excellent condition," Mr. Thompson said at the end of the tour. "But why is there so little furniture? Have you already moved most of your belongings?" "Yes," I replied. "We're moving to another city. Most of our belongings have already been shipped." He nodded without showing any suspicion. After a brief consultation with his wife, he turned to Helen and me. "We'll take the house. The price is right. When can we close the deal?" Helen beamed. "I'll prepare all the documents today. If everything goes smoothly, we can sign the contract tomorrow." "The sooner the better," said Mr. Thompson. "We're currently living with relatives, and the children are eager to move into their own home as soon as possible." When the Thompsons left, Helen turned to me with a serious expression on her face. "Mr. Baxter, I have to ask you again. Are you sure you want to do this? Selling the house without your son's explicit consent? It could lead to serious problems." I sighed. "I understand the risks, Helen. But yes, I'm sure my son needs to understand that his actions have consequences." She nodded, though I could still see the doubt in her eyes. "All right, I'll prepare all the documents. But I must warn you that your son may challenge this transaction in court." "Let him try," I replied. "I have all the necessary documents confirming my right to sell." When I got home, I felt a wave of doubt wash over me again. Was I doing the right thing? Wasn't it too cruel to take away my son's roof over his head, even if he treated me with such contempt? I sat down in an armchair and took out an old photo album. Here was Mortimer as a little boy, smiling at the camera, hugging my neck. Here he was as a teenager, serious with a guitar in his hands. Here were Edith, Mortimer, and I at his college graduation, all so happy and proud. When did everything change? When did I go from being the father he was proud of to a burden he wanted to get rid of? Maybe I was a bad father? Maybe I worked too much and didn't spend enough time with my son? Or maybe I put too much pressure on him to do well in school? But no, I always tried to be a good father. I worked to provide for my family, but I found time to communicate with my son. I supported his hobbies, even those I considered a waste of time. I rejoiced in his successes and comforted him in his failures. And what did I get in return? "We need to get rid of this old man." My determination returned, reinforced by bitter memories. I closed the album and put it away on the shelf. What's done is done. There's no turning back. The next day, I met with Helen and the Thompson family at the notary's office. All the documents had been prepared. All that remained was to sign them. Mr. Baxter, the notary, an elderly man with attentive eyes, looked at me over his glasses. "Are you acting on behalf of all the co-owners of the house?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "I have power of attorney." It was a lie, but I knew that by the time it was discovered, the deal would already be complete. And considering all the legal intricacies Noel had told me about, it would be difficult to contest. The notary nodded and handed me a pen. I signed all the necessary documents, feeling strangely light. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. The Thompsons also signed the contract and handed Helen a check for the full price of the house. The deal was done. "When can we move in?" asked Mr. Thompson. "Today, if you like," I replied. "The house is entirely at your disposal." They did not hide their joy. For them, it was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. For me, it was the end of an old one. Leaving the notary's office, I took a deep breath of fresh air. The deal was done. The house was sold. Most of Mortimer and Barrel's property had been sold off. All that remained was to wait for their return and see their reaction. Helen caught up with me in the parking lot. "Mr. Baxter, here's your share of the sale," she said, handing me an envelope. "After deducting the agency's commission and all taxes." I took the envelope without counting it. Money was not my goal. "Thank you for everything, Helen. You did a great job. I was just doing my job." She paused, then added, I hope you don't regret your decision. I hope so too, I replied honestly. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was just over $200,000, my share of the sale of the house. Together with the money from the sale of the belongings, it came to about $215,000. I spread the bills out on the table, looking at them with mixed feelings. This money was the material embodiment of my revenge, but it did not bring me joy. Only a bitter satisfaction at the thought that Mortimer and Beryl would get what they deserved. Beryl's words echoed in my head again. We need to get rid of this old man. And Mortimer's reply, we'll tell him tomorrow. They planned to abandon me in the middle of the trip, to leave me alone in a strange city. And now I had left them without a home and without most of their possessions. Was it fair? Was the punishment proportionate to the offense? I didn't know, but it was too late to change anything. After collecting the money and putting it in the safe, I went out onto the porch and sat in a chair, looking at my garden. The petunias that Beryl loved so much were blooming brightly. Edith loved these flowers too. What would she say if she knew what I had done? Would she approve of my actions or condemn them? Edith was always gentler than me, inclined to forgive and forget grievances. But even she would not have tolerated such treatment. I remembered how once, when Mortimer was a teenager, he had been rude to her, and she hadn't spoken to him for a whole week. She didn't shout or punish him. She just went about her business in silence, ignoring his existence. After a week, he came to her in tears, begging for forgiveness. Maybe I should have done the same. Just go home and stop communicating with my son and daughter-in-law? But no, that would be too soft. They need to understand that their words and actions have real consequences. Besides, I couldn't just stop communicating with them. They rarely called and only visited on a schedule, as if fulfilling a duty. They probably wouldn't even notice my silence. No, my decision was the right one. Harsh, but fair. They wanted to get rid of me. I got rid of their house and property. An eye for an eye, as they say. Now all that remained was to wait for their return. I imagined their faces when they discovered that their house had been sold and their belongings had disappeared. Shock, disbelief, anger. They would surely call me immediately, demanding an explanation. What would I tell them? The truth. That I had overheard their conversation in the bar. That I knew how they wanted to get rid of the old man. That I just beat them to it by getting rid of their property first. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my thoughts. It was Noel. Rodney, the documents for the sale of the house have been registered. Now it's official. Thanks, Noel, I replied. What now? Now we wait for Mortimer's reaction. Most likely he will try to contest the deal. But given all the circumstances, his chances are slim. What if he sues me? He may, Noel sighed, but I will defend your interests. We are in a good position. After talking to Noel, I felt more confident. Legally, I was protected. Mortimer could be angry, yell, threaten, but it would be difficult for him to change the situation. I sat back down in the chair on the porch, watching the sun set below the horizon. Tomorrow, Mortimer and Beryl would return from their trip. Tomorrow, they would find out what I had done. Tomorrow, a new chapter in our relationship would begin, if there was anything left of it. Strangely, I felt no fear or anxiety, only fatigue and a vague sense that everything was going as it should, that justice, however harsh, would prevail. I closed my eyes, inhaling the scent of petunias, and allowed myself to imagine for a moment that Edith was sitting next to me, as in the good old days, that she supported me, understood my feelings, that I was not alone in this struggle. And then I opened my eyes and saw the empty chair next to me. I was alone, and tomorrow I would have to face the consequences of my actions. After selling Mortimer's house, I decided not to stay in Titusville. Too many memories, too many acquaintances who would ask uncomfortable questions, and I wasn't ready to meet my son and daughter-in-law face-to-face yet. It was one thing to imagine their reaction, but quite another to see it with my own eyes. I started looking for a new place to live in the neighboring town of Pinecrest, an hour's drive from Titusville. It was a small, cozy town with quiet streets and lots of greenery, the perfect place for a peaceful retirement. The realtor, a young woman named Daisy, showed me several options, and I settled on a small one-story house on the outskirts of town. 3 rooms, a kitchen, a spacious porch, and a well-kept garden. Everything a single person my age could need. The house was built 10 years ago for an elderly couple, Daisy said as she showed me around. Unfortunately, the husband died last year, and his wife decided to move to Arizona to be with her daughter. That's why everything here is adapted for the elderly. Wide doorways, no thresholds, handrails in the bathroom. I nodded, appreciating these details. At 67, I didn't feel old enough to need handrails, but who knows what will happen in 10 or 15 years. How much are they asking for the house, I asked. 180,000, Daisy replied. But the owner is willing to negotiate. I think we can get the price down to 165. I mentally calculated my finances. After selling Mortimer's house, I had about $215,000. If I bought this house, I would still have enough left over for living expenses and unexpected costs. I'll take it, I said decisively, even at full price. Daisy raised her eyebrows in surprise. Are you sure? Usually clients want to look at several options. Think it over. I've already made up my mind, I replied. This house is right for me. When can we close the deal? Well, if you're paying cash and don't need a mortgage. She thought for a moment. I think we can have everything finalized within a week. The sooner the better, I said. One more question. Does the house come furnished? Partially, Daisy nodded. The main items, the bed, sofa, kitchen table, are staying. The owner only took her personal belongings and some mementos. That was another advantage. I didn't want to have to buy furniture and furnish the house from scratch. Great, I smiled. Then it's a deal. I made a deposit that same day and Daisy began processing the paperwork. I returned to Titusville to prepare for the move. At home, I sat down at the kitchen table and took out a notebook. I had to decide what to take with me and what to leave behind. I decided to sell the furniture along with the house. It was old but sturdy and might interest the new owners. Of course, I would take my personal belongings, clothes, books, and photo albums. But the rest? I glanced around the kitchen where Edith and I had spent so much time. Every item here held memories. The coffee cup she drank from in the mornings, the apron with sunflowers embroidered on it, hanging on a hook by the door, the collection of magnets on the refrigerator that she had collected over the years. It was painful to part with these things, but I knew I couldn't take everything with me. A new life required parting with the old. I spent the next few days sorting through things and packing what I had decided to take with me. At the same time, I put the house up for sale through the same real estate company that had helped me with Mortimer's house. I set the price below market value. I wanted the deal to go through quickly. All this time, I avoided checking my phone, knowing that sooner or later Mortimer and Beryl would return from their trip and discover that their house had been sold. They would surely call, demanding an explanation. But I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not now. On the fourth day after the sale of their house, just as I was finishing packing the books, the doorbell rang. It was sharp and insistent. Someone was holding their finger on the button, not letting go. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Mortimer stood on the threshold, his face contorted with anger. Behind him, I could see their rental car, with Beryl sitting inside. "What have you done?" he shouted as soon as I opened the door. "You sold our house? Are you out of your mind?" I looked at him calmly. Strangely, I felt neither fear nor guilt, only fatigue and a kind of detached curiosity. "Hello, Mortimer," I said in an even voice. "Yes, I sold the house, and I sold most of your possessions." He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time in his life. "Why?" His voice trembled. "Why did you do it?" "Because you wanted to get rid of me," I replied simply. "I overheard your conversation in the bar that night, about how I was a selfish old man who needed to be gotten rid of. How you plan to leave me behind in the next town and continue your journey together." Mortimer turned pale. He opened his mouth but couldn't say a word. "I just beat you to it," I continued. "You wanted to get rid of me, and I got rid of your house and your things. Fair enough, don't you think?" You had no right," he finally managed to say. "It's our house. Our things." "The house was bought with my money," I reminded him. "The $90,000 down payment was money your mother and I had saved our whole lives, and my name was on the documents as a co-borrower, so I had every right to sell it." "I'll take you to court," Mortimer said threateningly. "You'll answer for this." "You can try," I shrugged. But keep in mind that I have a written agreement that you were supposed to pay me back for the down payment, which you haven't done once in 2 years. From a legal standpoint, I had every right to initiate the sale to pay off the debt. Mortimer froze, remembering the agreement we had signed 2 years ago. At the time, it had seemed like a mere formality since I had never reminded him about the payments. Dad, his voice changed, becoming almost pleading. Let's talk. I'm sure we can work this out. You misunderstood our conversation. Misunderstood? I smiled bitterly. We need to get rid of this old man. He's just a selfish old man who's ruining our vacation. What's there to misunderstand? Mortimer lowered his eyes. Beryl just... She was upset. We weren't really going to... Don't lie to me, I interrupted him. I heard you say, we'll tell him tomorrow. You were planning to leave me in the next town. Admit it. He was silent, unable to confirm or deny my words. Where are we going to live now? He finally asked quietly. We don't have a home. We don't have any belongings. Where was I supposed to live if you had abandoned me in a strange city? I countered. Did you think about that? At that moment, the car door opened and Beryl approached us. Her eyes were red from crying, but they burned with anger. You're a monster, she said, looking at me. How could you do this to your own son? And how could you do this to me? I replied calmly. I gave you all my savings for the house. I organized this trip hoping we would become closer, and you plan to abandon me like a useless thing. We weren't going to abandon you, Beryl exclaimed. It was just a stupid idea. We would never have done that. Don't lie to me, Beryl, I said wearily. I heard every word, and I saw how Mortimer almost agreed with you. She looked at her husband as if seeking support, but he continued to stare silently at the ground. What should we do now? She asked after a pause, her voice sounding desperate for the first time. That's not my problem, I replied. You're adults. You'll figure it out. Dad, please. Mortimer finally looked up. Let's talk about it. Maybe we can still fix something. There's nothing to fix, I shook my head. The house is sold. The paperwork is done. Most of your belongings have been sold too. I'm using this money to start a new life. Without you. Without us? Mortimer looked shocked. Are you abandoning us? Didn't you abandon me? I shrugged. In any case, I'm moving to another city. I won't leave you my address. I don't want you coming to me with more demands or reproaches. But we're family, Mortimer said uncertainly. Family doesn't try to get rid of each other, I replied. Family doesn't consider each other a burden. What binds us together is not family. It's just biological kinship, nothing more. Beryl began to cry, covering her face with her hands. Mortimer put his arms around her shoulders but continued to look at me. What can I do to make you forgive us? He asked quietly. Nothing, I replied. Some things cannot be fixed with apologies or promises. You have shown me your true feelings. I have accepted them and am acting accordingly. So is this the end? Mortimer's voice sounded incredulous. Are you just writing us out of your life? Yeah, I nodded. This is the end. Goodbye. I closed the door without waiting for their response. Through the window, I could see them standing on the porch for a while, as if they couldn't believe what was happening. Then Mortimer said something to Beryl, and they slowly walked to the car. I drew the curtains and went back to packing the books. Strangely, I felt neither triumph nor satisfaction at their reaction, only emptiness and fatigue. The next day, I received a message from the realtor. A buyer had been found for my house in Titusville, a young family who was willing to pay the asking price and move in soon. They even agreed to buy most of the furniture, the realtor told me on the phone. They say they like the style and everything is in good condition. Great, I said. When can we close the deal? Early next week, if that's okay with you. Perfect. Everything was falling into place. By that time, the paperwork for the new house in Pinecrest should be ready. I could move in a week, leaving Titusville and all the memories behind. That evening, I received the first message from Mortimer. He wrote that he and Beryl were staying with her parents, trying to figure out the situation and hoping for my understanding. At the end, he asked if we could meet again and discuss everything calmly. I didn't reply. I saw no point in further conversation. Everything had already been said and done. 2 days later, another message arrived, this time more desperate. Mortimer wrote that he and Beryl had consulted a lawyer who said that the case was complicated, but they could try to contest the sale of the house. However, they did not want to go down that route, preferring a peaceful solution. Dad, please, let's talk. I understand that Beryl and I have hurt you deeply. What you heard was just silly chatter after a few glasses of wine. We would never leave you alone. Please believe me, I read the message several times, trying to find sincerity in it. But all I saw was the desperation of a man who had lost his home and possessions. Not regret for the pain he had caused, but fear of material loss. On the third day, Noel called. Rodney, your son and his wife came to see me, he said without preamble. They want to contest the sale of the house. And what did you tell them, I asked. The same thing I told you. That from a legal standpoint, you had the right to sell the house, given that your name was on the documents and they were not meeting their payment obligations. But they can try to contest the transaction on the grounds that you acted without their express consent. And what are their chances? Honestly, not very high, but the process could be long and unpleasant. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I thought about it. Lawsuits, public arguments, dirty laundry aired in public. That wasn't what I wanted. No, I finally replied. I don't want to sue my own son. But I'm not backing down either. The house is sold, period. They're offering a compromise, Noel said after a pause. They want you to give them back at least some of the money from the sale of the house so they can start over. What about the $90,000 I gave them 2 years ago, I asked. Haven't they thought about that? They say they'll pay you back as soon as they get back on their feet. I smiled. I've heard promises like that before. Tell them I'll think about it, I said, even though I already knew the answer. After talking to Noel, I sat on the porch, looking at my garden, which would soon no longer be mine. Things weren't turning out the way I had imagined. I expected to feel satisfaction from my revenge, but instead I felt only emptiness. Maybe I really had gone too far. Maybe I should have just told them what I thought of their behavior and left their house and belongings alone. But then I remembered Beryl's words. He's just a selfish old man. And Mortimer's, we'll tell him tomorrow. No, they deserved what they got. They wanted to get rid of me. I got rid of their house. It's only fair. The next day I received another message from Mortimer. This time it was short and completely different in tone. We understand that you don't want to talk to us. Fine, but know that we will fight for our house. We have hired a lawyer and are filing a lawsuit to invalidate the deal. I hope you understand what you are doing, because I am no longer sure I know my own father. For some reason, this message affected me more than all the previous ones. I am no longer sure I know my own father, as if I had betrayed him, not the other way around. I sat for a long time, staring at my phone screen, thinking about how to respond. Finally, I decided it was time to dot the I's and cross the T's. I typed a long message, allowing myself for the first time to fully express all the feelings that had been building up inside me since that night in Arizona. Mortimer, you write that you don't recognize me. But I didn't recognize you and Beryl that evening when you were discussing how to get rid of me. When you called me a selfish old man, a burden, a hindrance to your vacation. When you planned to leave me in a strange city and continue your trip together. You say it was just drunken talk? But I saw your face when Beryl suggested the plan. You weren't shocked or outraged. You considered it a real option. And the next day you told her, we'll tell him tomorrow. That doesn't sound like drunken talk. It sounds like a plan you were going to carry out. I gave you $90,000 for the house, money that your mother and I had saved our whole lives. I never asked for it back, even though we signed a payment agreement. I organized and paid for the trip to Arizona, hoping we would grow closer. And in return, I got contempt and plans to get rid of me. You say you're filing a lawsuit to invalidate the deal? Well, good luck. My lawyer is confident that your chances are slim. But even if you win, it won't change anything between us. Some things can't be fixed with apologies or court decisions. I'm moving to another city, starting a new life. Without you. Don't try to find me or contact me. You no longer exist to me, just as I ceased to exist to you the moment you decided to get rid of me. Goodbye, Mortimer. I hope this story teaches you that words and actions have consequences, and that betraying those close to you cannot be justified by drunken chatter or a moment of weakness. I reread the message, checking to see if I had missed anything important. Then I pressed send and turned off my phone, not wanting to see the reply. if there was one. The next day, I signed the papers to buy a new house in Pinecrest and arranged with a moving company to transport the things I had decided to take with me. Everything was going according to plan. 2 days later, I sold my house in Titusville and said goodbye to my neighbors, telling them I was moving closer to my relatives. No one asked any unnecessary questions, although I could see the curiosity in their eyes. It's a small town, everyone knows each other, and the sudden departure of someone who has lived here all their life arouses interest. On the morning of my departure, I walked around the house one last time, saying goodbye to every room, every corner that held memories of my life with Edith, of raising Mortimer, of years that now seem so distant. In the bedroom, I paused for a moment in front of Edith's photo on the bedside table. It was the only item I hadn't packed yet. "Would you approve of what I've done?" I asked quietly, looking at her smiling face. "Or would you say I've gone too far?" The photograph remained silent, but for some reason I felt that Edith would understand me. She had always been gentler than me, inclined to forgive and forget grievances, but her son's betrayal? Even she couldn't just turn a blind eye to that. I carefully packed the photo into a box with my personal belongings and carried it out to the waiting truck. All the other boxes had already been loaded. "Is that everything, sir?" asked the driver. "Yes, that's everything," I replied, glancing back at my former home. "We can go." I got into my car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I watched my house gradually shrink, becoming smaller and smaller until it disappeared around the bend. Ahead lay Pinecrest and a new life. A life without Mortimer and Beryl, without the burden of resentment and betrayal. I didn't know if it would be a happy one, but I was sure it would be mine. Only mine. 6 months flew by like a single day. I settled into my new home in Pinecrest, got to know my neighbors, and found my rhythm. Every morning began with a cup of coffee on the porch, which overlooked a small but well-kept garden. I planted petunias there, not because of Beryl, of course, but because Edith loved them. My closest neighbor, Lawrence Price, turned out to be a retiree like me. A former history teacher, he moved to Pinecrest after his wife died. We had a lot in common, and gradually we began to spend more and more time together, playing chess, discussing books, sometimes just sitting on the porch, watching the cars go by and people walk by. "You never talk about your family, Rodney," Lawrence remarked one day as he made a move with his queen. "Do you have children?" I paused before answering. Over the months, I had learned to avoid talking about Mortimer and Beryl, giving people the impression that I was simply a lonely widower with no children. "I had a son," I finally said, "but we lost touch." Lawrence nodded understandingly, asking no further questions. He rarely spoke about his own children, although I knew he had a daughter living somewhere on the West Coast. Besides Lawrence, I became friends with Gladys Monroe, an elderly lady who lived across the street. She was known throughout the neighborhood for her baking and often brought me fresh rolls or pies. In return, I helped her with small repairs around the house, screwing in light bulbs, fixing leaky faucets, replacing hinges on cabinet doors. The same work I had once done for strangers now brought me pleasure, because I saw genuine gratitude in Gladys's eyes. "You're a real treasure, Rodney," she would say, treating me to another culinary masterpiece. "I can't imagine how I managed before you came along." I would laugh it off, but deep down I appreciated her words. It felt good to be needed, to know that my skills and help were valued. Gradually, my circle of acquaintances in Pinecrest expanded. I began to regularly visit the local library where book lovers' meetings were held. There I met several retirees who shared my love of classical literature. We discussed what we had read, argued about the meaning of the works, and sometimes just shared news. The community center in town offered gardening classes, and I signed up for them, hoping to learn more about growing flowers and vegetables. The classes were led by an energetic woman in her 50s named Martha, who enthusiastically shared her knowledge and experience. "You have a great feel for plants, Rodney," she said to me after one of the classes, looking at my first successes in growing tomatoes. "Have you done any gardening before?" "A little," I replied. "I had a garden at my old house, but I mostly grew flowers. Vegetables are a new experience for me." "Well, you definitely have a talent," Martha smiled. "Come volunteer with us at the city park. We need more people with green fingers." I agreed and soon began helping out regularly with the upkeep of the city park. Physical work in the fresh air, communicating with like-minded people. All this filled my life with new meaning. 6 months flew by. I wasn't bored. I didn't feel lonely or abandoned. On the contrary, my life seemed more fulfilling and meaningful than before. The only reminder of the past were the occasional calls from Noel, my lawyer. He kept me informed about the lawsuit filed by Mortimer and Beryl to challenge the sale of the house. The case is progressing slowly, he told me once again. They insist that you acted without their consent and abused your position as co-borrower. But we have a strong case. The documents are on your side, and the payment agreement they failed to fulfill gives us an additional argument. And what are the prospects, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The judge is inclined to dismiss their claim, Noel replied, but the final decision has not yet been made. In any case, I don't think you should worry. I wasn't worried. Strangely, the lawsuit with my own son seemed distant and unrelated to my current life. It was as if it were happening to someone else. That day, after talking to Noel, I sat on the porch for a long time, thinking about how my life had changed over the past few months. I had moved to an unfamiliar city, completely changed my surroundings, and started new activities. And yet I felt calm, at peace, as if I had finally found my place. Lawrence caught me in these thoughts when he came in with a bottle of whiskey and an offer to have a drink. "You look like you're deciding the fate of the world," he remarked, sitting down in the armchair next to me. "What are you thinking about?" "Life," I replied evasively, accepting the glass of amber liquid. "How everything changes. And how does it change for you?" Lawrence raised his glass in a toast. "For better or for worse?" I thought about the question. 6 months ago, I lost my family, my only son and daughter-in-law. I broke a bond that seemed unbreakable, but in doing so, I gained new friends, new interests, a new sense of self. "Different," I finally replied. "Not better or worse. Just different," Lawrence nodded understandingly. "You know, Rodney, sometimes loss is gain. We lose something that seemed important, and it frees up space for something new. Perhaps something more valuable," his words made me think. What had I lost? A son who considered me a burden, a daughter-in-law who wanted to get rid of me, a family that existed only in words but not in reality. And what had I gained? Freedom, self-respect, new friends who appreciate me for who I am, new interests that fill my life with meaning. "You're probably right," I said, sipping my whiskey. "Sometimes you have to lose something to find something else. Especially if what you lost was causing you pain," Lawrence added. "You know, I never told you this, but I didn't just move here after my wife died. I ran away from my daughter." I looked at him in surprise. In all the time I'd known him, Lawrence had never talked about his daughter, except for occasional mentions of her existence. "She's not a very good person," he continued, staring into the distance. "After Martha, my wife, died, Caroline started showing her true colors. She was always a mama's girl, and I was just an ATM, the guy who pays the bills. But while Martha was alive, it was somehow smoothed over. And then," he paused, taking a sip of whiskey, "she started hinting that it was time for me to go to a nursing home, that she wanted my house, for investment purposes, you see, that I was no longer capable of taking care of myself. I was 68 and in great shape." He smiled bitterly. "I put up with it for almost a year, and then I just sold the house, bought a new one here, and left, leaving her a short note. She still doesn't know where I live." I listened to his story with a growing sense of recognition. It was like looking in a mirror and seeing my own situation reflected back at me. "And you don't regret it?" I asked quietly. "Sometimes," Lawrence admitted honestly. "She is my daughter after all. My only child. There are moments when I think maybe I should have tried again, talk, explain how I feel. But then I remember her cold eyes when she talked about the nursing home, and I realize I made the right choice. Some relationships can't be saved, Rodney, and sometimes the best thing you can do is let them go." We sat in silence, sipping whiskey and watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon. Lawrence's words echoed in my head. Some relationships can't be saved. Sometimes the best thing you can do is let them go. "You have problems with your son too, don't you?" Lawrence asked suddenly. "Is that why you moved here? Is that why you never talk about him? I sighed. Maybe it was time to share my story. Yes, I admitted. My son and his wife, they wanted to get rid of me, to abandon me in the middle of a trip that I had organized and paid for. I overheard their conversation. They called me a burden, a selfish old man. And what did you do? There was no judgment in Lawrence's eyes, only understanding. I left before they did. I went home and sold their house. I was a co-owner, so I had the right. And I sold most of their property. Then I moved here without leaving an address. Lawrence whistled. That's harsh, but damn, you deserved it. They're trying to sue me, I added. They want the house back, but my lawyer says I'm legally in the right, and they're unlikely to win the case. How do you feel after all this? Lawrence asked. Angry? Regretful? I thought about it. How did I feel about Mortimer and Beryl now, 6 months after those events? You know, it's strange, but I feel almost nothing, I admitted. No anger, no regret. It's as if it were another life, other people. I just let them go. Lawrence nodded. That's a good sign. It means you're really moving on. You're not stuck in the past, tormenting yourself with doubts and resentment. That's great, Rodney. We finished our whiskey, discussed the latest town news and our plans for the weekend. Lawrence left, and I stayed on the porch, watching the first stars light up in the sky. The conversation with him left me with a strange feeling of lightness. It was as if I had finally spoken my mind, lifted a weight off my soul that I hadn't even been fully aware of. I had told someone the whole story for the first time, and the world hadn't fallen apart. On the contrary, it was easier to breathe. The next morning, I woke up with the feeling that a new phase of my life was beginning. It was as if my conversation with Lawrence was a kind of final point in the story with Mortimer and Beryl. I had made a decision, made a choice, and now I could move on without looking back. After breakfast, I called Noel. Rodney, good to hear from you, he said. I was just about to call. There's news on the case. What is it? I asked, although I was no longer so concerned about the outcome. The judge dismissed Mortimer and Beryl's lawsuit. The deal has been declared legal. They can appeal, but their chances of success are minimal. Okay, I said calmly. Thanks, Noel. For everything, are you okay? There was concern in his voice. You sound kind of distant. I'm perfectly fine, I assured him. I just realized that this story doesn't mean that much to me anymore. I'm moving on. After talking to Noel, I decided to take a walk around town. It was a sunny, warm day, perfect for a leisurely stroll. I walked along familiar streets, greeted neighbors, and stopped to chat with new acquaintances. In the park where I had helped with the landscaping, the flowers we had planted were blooming. I sat down on a bench and watched the children playing with their parents. Families, real families, where people care for each other, support each other, love each other. Strangely, I felt no envy or bitterness as I watched them. Only a calm acceptance of the fact that I no longer had that, and perhaps never really had. That evening, I received a message from Mortimer, the first in several months. Dad, you probably already know that the court rejected our claim. Beryl and I decided not to appeal. It's pointless, and we don't have the money for further proceedings. We moved to another city and started from scratch. Beryl got a new job, and I found a place too. We live in a rented apartment and are saving up for our own house. I've thought a lot about what happened, about what you heard that evening. I'm not going to make excuses or say that you misunderstood. You understood everything correctly. Beryl and I did discuss how to get rid of you during the trip. It was mean, selfish, and just plain disgusting of us. I have no excuse. I'm not asking you to give us back the money or forgive us. I just wanted you to know that I realized what I did, and I'm ashamed. You were a good father. You deserved a better son. I don't know if you'll read this message. I don't know if you have this phone number, but I had to try to tell you this. Mortimer. I read the message several times, trying to understand how I felt. Anger? Number. Satisfaction that he had admitted his guilt? No, not that either. A desire to respond, to resume communication? Definitely not. I felt only a calm acceptance of the fact that this chapter of my life was closed. Mortimer had admitted his guilt, and that was good. For him. Maybe it would help him become a better person, not repeat similar mistakes with other people. But it didn't matter to me anymore. I was moving on with my life, and my path no longer crossed with his. I didn't reply to the message. Instead, I deleted it and blocked Mortimer's number. Not out of malice or revenge, but simply because it was the right thing to do. A clean break, without any unspoken words or false hopes. A month later, I was sitting on the porch with Gladys, enjoying her famous apple pie. We were talking about the upcoming town festival, where I had agreed to help organize a gardening competition. "You've changed so much this year, Rodney," Gladys said suddenly. "When you first moved here, you seemed withdrawn, as if you were carrying a heavy burden, but now you smile. You participate in community life. You help people." What happened? I smiled as I looked at my garden, where not only petunias were blooming, but also roses, which I had started growing on Martha's advice. "I've accepted my loneliness, Gladys. And I've realized that it doesn't mean emptiness or abandonment. It can be filled with meaning, friendship, new interests. It can be freedom." "Freedom?" She looked surprised. "Yes, the freedom to be myself. Not to conform to other people's expectations, not to feel like a burden or unnecessary, just to be who I am and do what brings me joy." Gladys nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Rodney, you're a wise man. Many people cling to toxic relationships their whole lives, afraid of being alone. But you found the strength to let them go and find something more valuable." "Self-respect," I said quietly. "It's more valuable than any false family ties." We sat in cozy silence, enjoying the pie and the view of the garden. The sun was slowly setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, children were playing. A dog was barking, and cars were passing by. The usual sounds of an ordinary day in a small town. And I suddenly realized that I was happy, not ecstatically, not wildly, but quietly and calmly. Happy here and now, at this moment, in this life that I chose for myself. I lost my son and daughter-in-law, but I found myself. And this deal turned out to be the most profitable in my life.